Former President Trump took aim at two lawmakers from his own party over the weekend. During a rally in South Carolina, he went after Republican Representatives Nancy Mace and Tom Rice. Both incumbents are facing primary opponents in the upcoming midterms. The former president called Mace and Rice, quote, bad people. He encouraged rallygoers to instead vote for their challengers, whom he described as America First champions. Katie Arrington and Russell Fry joined the former president on stage Saturday. But former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley was notably absent. She was once a strong supporter of Mr. Trump and served as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations during his term. For more on this, let's bring in Associated Press politics reporter Meg Kinnard. Meg, good to talk to you. Let's start just with the basics of this evolving sort of situation here where Mr. Trump has very publicly now announced he's obviously not supporting Rice and Mace. What is it specifically that the former president has against them?
Hey, Elaine, it's really good to be with you. For former President Trump and Congressman Tom Rice, it all comes down to his impeachment vote. After the January 6th violence at the Capitol last year, Tom Rice was one of 10 sitting House Republicans to support impeachment for Donald Trump. That is something that the former president has frequently talked about. He has said that that vote, in his eyes, made Tom Rice someone who no longer represents the kind of Republican Party that he wants in Congress. And he put Tom Rice, frankly, on a target list of House Republicans that the former president says should not be reelected. For Nancy Mace, it is comments also related to January 6th. The day of the violence and in the days that followed, she talked about how it was a shame, in her view, that so much of what Donald Trump had accomplished in office was wiped out with what happened on January 6th. And she was very strong in her words against what she saw that day and how disappointing she felt that was for that to have happened at the tail end of the Trump administration. Nancy Mace is somebody who had Donald Trump's strong support when she ran for this seat first in 2020. And so now, again, along with Tom Rice, she's on a list of House Republicans that the former president says should not be reelected this fall.
Yeah, I mean, she came on this program on Red and Blue, and it was interesting because to watch that, as I say, sort of evolution where she did have the support of the former president. But then in those days after January 6th, this was one of the programs that she came on, and she was very sharp in her criticism of former President Trump. So what do the incumbents say now about this criticism from Mr. Trump?
Well, for Tom Rice, he is quick to point out that among the sitting delegation from South Carolina at the time, he was the one who had voted along with the former president's policies more so than any other. He frequently points to things like his views on tax policy and other accomplishments legislatively from Congress that he says are very much in line with the former president. So he's quick to point to his record and say, if you really want someone who represents what the former president supported in Congress, I'm still your guy. And those are still the ideals that I will bring back to the House. For Nancy Mace, who, as we noted, didn't really sit in Congress for much time during the actual Trump administration, she is also quick to note that she does still support a lot of the things that he stood for. She has talked about foreign policy ideals and things that she says are still in line with some of the accomplishments from his administration. So they're both basically pointing to their records and pointing to policy rather than some of the rhetoric when they're arguing for their own reelections.
Well, Meg, take us through former South Carolina governor and former UN ambassador Nikki Haley's up and down relationship with Mr. Trump. Where do they stand now?
That's always a good question. There has been a lot of undulation between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. Obviously, she served in his administration and they worked closely together when she was UN ambassador. But also, after January 6th, she was quick to criticize what happened that day and to discuss what she saw as a shame as the violence happening right at the tail end of the Trump administration and things that she felt somewhat besmirched his accomplishments in office. But several months ago, she did also meet with the former president at Mar-a-Lago. There's obviously no definitive details as to what happened during that meeting, but they have been able to have some conversations. And it is it's funny how South Carolina oftentimes plays out a lot of what we're seeing on the national scale. But when you look forward to 2024 and think about some of the personalities on the Republican side of things that could be contending for a GOP nomination, obviously Nikki Haley's name is often mentioned among that group. And so, she has said, she told me when I asked her last year if she would seek the nomination if Donald Trump were also running. She said no then. But she has also kind of said a little bit different of an answer to that question in the months since. So that's a higher level politics than what we're talking about for 2022. But it's also always interesting to try to parse the relationship between those two.
Always, and very much to be continued. Let's turn to Donald Trump's former chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. He also seems to be pulling away from his former boss. He's endorsed Representative Nancy Mace. What is Mulvaney's strategy, and what might his political future entail?
Yet again, I sound like a broken record, but Mick Mulvaney, who clearly did play a high-level role in several different capacities in the Trump administration, was also quick to come out after January 6th and disassociate himself. He resigned and said he did not want any part as to what had happened that day. Now, he is endorsing Nancy Mace and quipped recently that clearly Donald Trump didn't ask his advice for the 1st District because he would have advised him to endorse Representative Mace for a second term. So yet again, a former Trump administration official somewhat acting as a proxy here in the 1st District of South Carolina when it comes to this congressional race. Mick Mulvaney has been doing some consulting and lobbying in Washington. He has not been active on the ground in South Carolina for some time, but he certainly is among the names that Representative Mace is adding to what she would argue perhaps are some of her Trump administration credentials, at least when it comes to former pieces of the administration and personalities who are supporting her for a second term.
No shortage of fascinating dynamics in your state. Meg Kinnard. Meg, thank you very much.
Thank you, Elaine.